started to, build out my garage setup, all of a sudden I had 3 new gen miners running in our garage.
What do people underestimate when it comes to the difficulty of going from, I want to mine Bitcoin, to actually getting a machine hashing and online if they're trying to do it themselves?
This has happened a couple times where I've had career changes because I reached a point where what I believe in and who I am did not align with what I was doing. And that's where Bitcoin kind of resurfaced, and it was the solution.
Welcome back to Hosting Bitcoin, the show where we dive into the builders, thinkers, and operators who are shaping the decentralized future of tomorrow. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about Bitcoin, he helps make it real, physical, and extremely efficient. Todd Perlmeter is a seasoned mining facility operator in the Bitcoin mining space, working closely with Abundant Mines to scale our mining sites and operations teams with precision, integrity, and long-term vision. With a background in real estate lending, investing, and development, as well as owning his own businesses, Todd brings order to chaos and turns raw potential into operational excellence. In a space where uptime is profit and every watt matters, Todd helps mining sites go from open fields to fully optimized infrastructure. And today, we're diving into what it really takes to run a mining site, what separates good operations from great ones, what most people don't understand about building and operating mining sites, and why site-level leadership is one of Bitcoin's most underrated leverage points. Todd Perlmeter, welcome to Hosting Bitcoin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bo. This is exciting.
Todd, you and I have known each other for several months now. We've been working together. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And before we dive into maybe more of the mining specific things that you've been working on, I would love to get a sense for everybody that doesn't know you of your background, how you found Bitcoin, how you found Bitcoin mining, and what your world looked like before you got into the Bitcoin space.
All right. Yeah, great question. And there's quite a variety of answers that I can go with that. So that's going to be fun. So I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and still live here. So I'm a long living Oregonian at heart, and was born and raised here. So I have a really strong affinity for this state, this community, the natural resources we have available, getting out in the woods and hiking and playing and going to the beach. So, just kind of, I grew up in this space, and it's just, I love being in Oregon, and I'm very thankful to be working in a space that I can stay in this area and be doing what I love. So, as far as my Bitcoin journey, I found Bitcoin. The first time I heard about Bitcoin was in 2013. I was driving down with some friends down to a buddy's bachelor party in Tahoe, and it was the groom's brother was always this. He was the older brother, and he was always kind of the out there eccentric brother that was always coming and hanging out, and had maybe consumed a few too much intoxicants from time to time, and kind of just blabbering aimlessly. So he started talking about Bitcoin on the way down, and there was a packed car full of us friends, and we all just kind of like laughed and shrugged him off, and just said, he's just going off about this crazy thing like he usually does. And so, just like anyone, kind of shrugged Bitcoin off the first time I heard it, and in hindsight, that was probably a decent mistake, but that's just how the world works. So. But then, later on in life, I started to get into the real estate realm. And so I got really passionate into the investment world and real estate world, and just dove in deep, and purchased 2 homes. One was a house that we lived in, and the other we turned into a rental property. And that was the whole idea, was to kind of do this whole post 2009 kind of buy a house, live in it for 2 years, renovate it, rent it out, keep rolling that money, and just building out a real estate portfolio. And we were on the right track for that. I also, because I got so passionate in it, reached out to the mortgage lender that gave me the home loan for my house and said, "Hey, I'm interested in getting into this industry." I had just kind of closed out my 10 years of experience in the restaurant and beer world. COVID happened. I got our 3 restaurants and brewery kind of back up and running to a certain extent, and sat down with the owner of the businesses that I was managing and just said, here's the deal. I am the most expensive employee you have. We cannot survive if you keep me on. And it was just kind of, I had to be the one to bear the bad news to the owner and a big slap in the face and kind of throw myself under the bus, and realizing after looking at all the financials that it wasn't sustainable for me to stay on. And so I made that call and parted ways, and then kind of started working and said, you know what did I like about running restaurants? What did I like about, running breweries? And it was less about the people. I got a little tired of managing people, but I really enjoyed helping and running finances and helping my employees get their finances in order. And so, along with my real estate passion, it started to kind of open the door up a little bit of like, I really want to dive into some financial back end, and see what's going on in the plumbing. So I became a loan officer, a real estate loan officer, and it was a very fast journey with a very small company. I got hired in October and had my license within a month, and was originating residential real estate loans. And within about 3 months of that, I started to peel the onion layers back on what happens when I make a loan. What is the process? Where does this money come from? Let's start looking at and start kind of to dive and just follow that money trail all the way back to its originating source. And it was upon that and learning that is what made me realize how broken our financial system is. I recognized that I was a middleman, and there was about 10 middlemen in a real estate transaction that were all scraping dollars off of each transaction, ultimately making it less affordable for the buyer. And I didn't feel good about that. And so that's where I started to look into alternatives, and that's where Bitcoin kind of resurfaced and started to make itself very apparent to me that it was the solution. And I continued to make loans. I really still enjoyed really loving helping, especially first time homebuyers get into their house. Not only just get in their house, but really understand their finances. Being able to sit down with people and look at their financial situation and really work with them on what is best for their individual situation, because everyone has different goals, everyone has a different outlook on life. And that was really fun for me. So I still continue to do that while divesting quite a bit of my personal assets and investing in this other crazy digital scarce resource that I had found. And yeah, so that's kind of my general Bitcoin journey. Is after I started to really understand Bitcoin a little bit more, after hundreds of hours of digging and research. I was never really interested in Bitcoin mining. It was one of those things that seemed a little technical, a little esoteric to me. I really understood the financial aspects of Bitcoin. I understood the self custody and property aspects of Bitcoin, and I really understood the coincidence and the similarities to how our world works with how Bitcoin kind of mimics that, or potentially the other way around, depending on how you want to look at it. But after I started to look into mining a little bit and just started, was like, well, what is this? There's a whole other aspect. This is like a whole door of Bitcoin that I've just never experienced and never dove into. And started to understand it. And that opened up the door to me becoming one of those crazy pleb home miners, where I dove in deep and started to build out my garage setup to accommodate some miners. And all of a sudden I had upgraded my electrical panel all by myself, installed some 240 outlets and some HVAC, and had 3 new gen miners running in our garage. Dollar cost averaging with my electric bill. And that's essentially was the numbers that got me to Bitcoin mining. Was I said, okay, I'm making decent income. I have excess income from what my expenditures are. I am going to be investing in Bitcoin. And so I started to run the numbers and said, if I'm going to be investing X amount of dollars into Bitcoin every month, I might as well be investing it through mining, earning non-KYC sats directly to my wallet that I can control. And the electric company is the one that I'm paying and dollar cost averaging with it into Bitcoin with. So that was my kind of my journey.
I love it. There's so many places we could go from there, but one thing that you touched on Uh, I want to know, when did the privacy, security, like protect your data, protect your identity, when did that whole part of your life surface? Because you recently
Hmm.
did a course for our clients about how to navigate privacy and security in the digital world. And that is a deep, deep rabbit hole to fall down. Was
Yes,
that
it is.
coincident with you discovering Bitcoin and mining, or how did that come into the picture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I found, I think thinking back onto my earlier, like even young days, I had this weird, I don't even know if I've really kind of, I haven't even told my fiance this, I don't think, but I had this weird, kind of a hobby, I guess, or thought process going through my head of like alternate identities. I had this like, it was this weird kind of like thing as a young child. I went to the library and started to research into like, how do would I change my identity? Like, can I assume someone's identity? And started to, so I think that's kind of like where it first started. I don't know what planted that seed and how I got to where I am from that, but probably when I was about 25 years old is when I really started to dive into the privacy and security realm. I became, and I don't really know what kind of stimulated that to more of a strong hobby and a passion, but I think I always have had the mentality of just questioning and asking, why are we doing this? Why does it happen like this, as opposed to just going with the status quo? And so I started to ask questions of, why do I need a Gmail? Why am I getting Amazon packages delivered in my personal name when Amazon doesn't need to know who I am? And it's just like these weird random questions would pop into my head. And as opposed to them letting them like fleet out, I would try and act on them. And so I started to explore different realms and just protecting kind of my cell phone number, my personal identity, my physical address. And it just so happened that when I found Bitcoin, it really coincided with those practices. Self custody was a huge one for me, and I kind of took a different journey into my Bitcoin. You know, like my first Bitcoin, I think most people will, they'll go to a Coinbase or Robinhood or Cash App and buy Bitcoin and hold it and trade it or sell it a little bit. I didn't buy any Bitcoin until I had fully understood what self custody was. And so when I acquired my first Bitcoin, I acquired my first Bitcoin anonymously through a Bitcoin ATM that I was allowed to put a false phone number in, put $900 cash into the ATM, and get Bitcoin deposited in my wallet. And but what I wanted to make sure of is that I understood self custody fully before taking possession of this scarce asset. And so I think it just fit. It was a natural fit that my passion for privacy and my passion for a non-state controlled property and asset just fit right into when I found Bitcoin, and it's continued to kind of thrive in that realm.
I think the privacy ethos and the idea that privacy is a fundamental human right is very core to much of the Bitcoin space. I'm curious why you personally have such an identification with it, because it seems to me to run straight to the core of how you make decisions as a person.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's awesome that you kind of can see that too, which kind of shows that I'm really living that, what I talk to. I feel really strongly about free speech. I feel really strongly about self sovereignty, and I had for a long time. I always thought I would be like one of those single guys for my whole life that just had a dog and didn't rely on anyone. And I think that type of mentality from a young age, it really ingrained in me and built a sense of self responsibility and self esteem that I don't need anyone. I can't trust anyone except for myself. And that has become a really core ethos in how I proceed through this world. And it's something I try and teach my kid. It's something I try and teach family members and friends, is just if you are dependent on other people for your happiness or for your success, you are bound to get let down. It's until you can really be self-sufficient and trust that you can go out and be by yourself for a few days and not talk to anyone and disconnect from your phone and you're still going to be okay, and you're maybe going to thrive in those situations. So I think it really just comes from a sense of this ingrained kind of mentality that I've always had from a very young age of really just not relying on anyone else. And I think privacy and security comes into that. It allows us to act in that way in this crazy digital world where we're all connected.
Hmm. And you mentioned in there self-reliance, which I think is a also a very core quality in a lot of the Bitcoin space, but is also extremely important in your position where you're managing a full mining site, you're managing hundreds, if not thousands of machines at any given time. You've got to be able to troubleshoot an electrical issue, a network issue, any number of issues that might arise. And if you can't figure it out, there may not be somebody who's within a couple hour drive. And in an environment where downtime can be measured in the cost of thousands of dollars an hour, what's the mindset that you have around uh, keeping a mining site running, but also responding to issues? Because one thing that I've admired about you is there's a way that you can get too into the noise and the nitty gritty of what changes on a minute by minute basis, such that you can lose track of the big picture. So I'd love to hear how you think of operating a large scale mining site at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. This was a learning experience too of operating this. I had managed for years many employees in many locations of like restaurants and brewery side, and so the management is the easy part for me. It's just I'm managing a different type of employees now. I'm managing employees that don't yell at me through their voice; they just yell at me through their fans. So it's kind of nice, but I
More of a
think
squeal than a yell.
exactly, or a cyber hornet, as Sailor would kind of say. I think the key thing is it's building upon that self reliance and asking questions, and really going out and learning, and not being afraid to try to learn and try to understand something first before asking questions. I think asking questions is such a key element, and but I think that we have gotten to a place that we tend to, instead of stepping back, taking a breath, really thinking about the problem, thinking about the goal that you're trying to accomplish, and seeing if you can find a solution first. We innately have kind of, and I think it's part of this kind of fast moving social media type of culture that we're in, is we look for these instant, quick answers. And so instead of taking a second to slow down and try to find the answer yourself, we ultimately just hop on a text message or a phone or a Slack message and try to ask someone else the answer. And that, I think, can be productive to a certain extent, but it also becomes to where you are not working your brain out in a capacity of trying to problem solve. You are working your brain out in a capacity of trying to answer a question. And the problem solving, I think, is the key element there. And I think we jump just too much to trying to get to the end goal. And there's that kind of that age old proverb of, the monk that gets on a boat and rows across the lake and is so focused on getting across the lake, and he's just paddling as hard as he can, and he's just like looking down and gets across, and he looks back, and he doesn't realize that he had missed every other boat that he went past, and he missed an entire school of fish that he could have caught for dinner, and he missed some birds flying around. And it really just ingrains. It's like it's follow the journey, and it's all about the journey, not the end goal. And so I think that kind of comes with part of that ethos of problem solving. I also owe a debt of gratitude to one of my old bosses in the mortgage world. He was extremely good about. I mean, the mortgage world is heavily regulated. There is compliance. There is, if you mess up in some way, there is potential lawsuits. You can lose your license. There is financial fines on you personally. So you have to be very thoughtful. You have to be very careful. And you have to understand what's going on. And there is a slew of regulations this thick that apply to each individual loan. And so I do think he also instilled in me where I would have a question, and he would, I'd go into his office and say, "Hey, I have a question about this underwriting condition." And he would say, You go find the answer and come back to me when you think you found the answer, and then we'll talk about uh, if that's correct or how I would think about it. So he always pushed me and all of our staff to try to go find the answer first and then come ask the question. And I really think that helped push me in that realm of wanting to learn as opposed to just knowing the answer.
That applies so well to our space because as much as we want the instant gratification, as much as we want GPT to tell us how to run our business and build our empire, there's really not a lot of blueprint out there for either running a mining operation, building a mining operation. There's scattered videos here and there and some deep articles, but it's really a case by case engineering problem every time. And you were not just involved in operating the site, but were also instrumental in the actual construction of what you're now running.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the things that you learned going through the process of figuring this out from the ground up?
Oh man, so much. It was a huge learning curve. I feel fortunate because I do have quite a bit of construction experience. So I can get my hands dirty and I can think in a physical engineering mentality. But coming on at the time that I did with Abundant Minds back in August, I mean, you guys had just closed on this field that we were going to build a site on, and so I feel really fortunate to have come on at that time, as opposed to coming on after the site was built and saying, "Okay, here, turn your job's to turn the miners on and make sure they're running." Being there from the start and getting my hands dirty and getting muddy and dirty and going through problems and troubleshooting really, first of all, it just helps me completely understand that site and I know what goes into kind of building a site too now, which is really fun. But what I came to understand with our site build was there is not a lot of information out there to find answers to your questions. So quite a bit of it is figuring it out, trial and error, and trying to find someone who has some sort of capacity of knowledge in that realm, not necessarily like the Bitcoin realm, but like, hey, we need this concrete done in this way for this electrical vault. Like, what? Go to a concrete professional and figure out like what do we need to do here. And I think that also goes in with what we were talking about earlier of asking questions and trying to figure out and understand what was going on. I look back, there was we have a 10 by 10 concrete vault buried in the ground that this electrical, transformer sits on top of. And it was filling up with water because it turned into the rainy season. And so I like started freaking out and I was in there with a sump pump and we had to go scramble to the underground pool store to get this like putty that could go underwater to seal up all these cracks. And I was like spending 3 days in there just trying to stop this water from coming in. And then we found out that that's how it's designed, is to fill up and get water in. So, certain things, it's like, I wish I would have asked that question 3 days before after getting soaking wet and dirty and banging my head against the wall, kind of pumping this out. But that's just part of the process. And, once again, I'm not wanting to go to the other side of that pond. I want to experience the journey along the way. And so being able to go through that process, seeing the permitting process, knowing how, some of the issues we had with subcontractors and not thinking through certain aspects fully and cutting, I wouldn't say cutting corners, but not making sure that we had to rebuild some corners is a better way to say that. Is we cut some corners off that we probably shouldn't have, and we were like, oh, we shouldn't have cut the corner off. It's time to rebuild the corner. And that's just part of the learning process, and that's just part of the growing. And I'm excited because I know that the next build that we do is going to be so much smoother because we have gone through this and we didn't just hire out to some subcontractor to kind of lead the show and showed up when it was done, but we were on the ground, hands in the mud, fortunately not getting electrocuted, getting these sites up and running. So, there's an aspect, and that's where I'm thankful for our team, is we're a hardworking, boots on the ground team. And I know that that's not how a lot of, companies thrive. And it's not how a lot of, businesses do buildings like this, especially in this space. They hire out, they come on, there's issues, they say, hey, there's an issue, they have their electrician come out and fix it, as opposed to having our team fully understand what's going on. And we have such an amazing team that has such different realm of like background and specialties and skill sets that we can tap into, that it's like unstoppable at this point.
I'd agree with you. It's only gotten more incredible to me how deep the skill set runs in the team. And when you're first starting anything, you have to wear so many hats and to varying degrees be competent at things that you're only sort of competent in. And it makes me happy that it seems like with every passing day, there's someone who is far more skilled than I am at every aspect of this business, which, other than just improving the service, makes me feel safe because it means that we've got redundancy in pretty much everything.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about is exactly what you just described. There's way more that goes into building a site and operating a site than I think people are generally aware of. And some of that is by design. When you're hosting with Abundant Minds, you're not trying to get a job. You're really looking for some kind of turnkey income that's going to
Mm-hmm.
come in without you really having to learn or do much of anything. And it's great from a service perspective, but in some ways is a detriment because in some ways it deprives people from understanding how the sausage is made, what really goes on behind the scenes. So
Yep.
for those people that think, oh, you're just running software and plugging in computers and then letting them alone for weeks at a time, what actually goes on behind the scenes when you're operating a mining site?
Yeah, good question, and it's always changing, which is fun. So it's always part of the learning curve. But there's quite a bit of boots on the ground, actual physical work that needs to get done with these sites, and go from actually receiving ASIC machines, and getting them tested, booted up, making sure that they are working as we need them to. There is a ton of backend configuration that we do with these machines to make sure that they are running as smoothly as possible. And then on the site themselves, I mean, the main thing is keeping airflow going, keeping moisture out, making sure that these machines are running at peak efficiency. We have plans in place and systems in place that really it makes it so it makes our jobs a little bit easier because we have set up these systems in place. And with some of these things, relying on people is can be tricky sometimes. So that's where we have been working at finding a balance between the physical, hands and the digital automation. And I don't think there will ever be a point where one is going to win over the other. I think it's all a balance of, it's really a balance there. But something that people don't really understand too with these ASIC machines is they're all hardwired. So there's no Wi-Fi routers in these things. They have to be physically wired up. So there is either a power connection or an Ethernet connection that is a physical connection that can fail and or not work as advertised. And there is a varying, a multitude of physical switches, ports, connections on site that these machines are dependent on. That is our job as the operators to make sure that everything's running smoothly, making sure the software is updated, making sure that when we do have an issue with the machine that it can be handled, and we can logically figure out what the problem is, and that we have supplies on site to fix them. A lot of times these machines need a new control board, a new fan, new hash board, new power supply unit. Those are all things that literally take hands, a screwdriver, and a little bit of logic and know-how to make happen. And it is impossible to fix those things with the press of a button. So it's not challenging, it's not hard, but it does take a lot of management. It takes a lot of organization, and it takes it takes some work ethic to show up and make sure those machines are running, because ultimately, I know that our clients are expecting the machines to keep running at peak efficiency, and that it is my job to fulfill that expectation.
One thing that's become so cool to me, especially recently, is that we've gotten so dialed in and so prepared in many ways that someone can essentially pay in the morning and by the afternoon see Bitcoin flowing into their wallet, which is
Yep.
something that I was not able to do when I first got into the space and was looking for service like this. And that to some degree might fool people into it being very simple on the back end. And you just went into much of what goes into actually managing a site that people don't take into account. But what do people underestimate when it comes to the difficulty of going from I want to mine Bitcoin to actually getting a machine hashing and online if they're trying to do it themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good, I think the biggest thing that I really see a disconnect with is it kind of goes back to a previous point that we were talking about the different speeds that the worlds live in. And so I've seen that with some of our clients. I've seen that with some of our staff as well, is understanding or not understanding that the digital world moves faster than the physical world. And just like Bitcoin bridges the digital and physical, we as operators of a Bitcoin mine are doing the same thing. And so it is really easy to make a plan in theory and have that work out on a spreadsheet or a flow chart, but when it actually is requiring physical hands on the ground and figuring things out, that's when the time frames start to misalign. And so I think that's something that we are continually working on building out in our team and our systems is setting expectations with internally and externally with what the realities are of a machine getting turned on and a machine getting fixed. So a great example is we had a meeting yesterday and to talk about kind of how to minimize downtime as much as possible. Well, there is some literal physical constraints that we cannot win. We're not going to be able to beat out physical constraints of me having to drive out to the site to physically plug in a machine. We're not going to fix the physical constraints of having to, go out and fix machines. We're not going to solve the physical constraints of it takes a machine time to warm up and start actually producing hash rate and submitting shares to the pool. And so maybe I've configured a machine and it's all ready to go and I've pressed the button and it looks good on the computer side, but it still is not showing up on client's pool. And that's just a when in doubt, zoom out. Take a breath, go for a walk, come check in on it. This is a long-term play. Bitcoin mining is a long-term play. And if you're looking for hourly results of hash rate, then you might be having unrealistic expectations. And I think it's just a really good mentality to have is that these machines have varying hash rate, they have varying downtime, we have varying issues, and it's all about averages. And the nice thing is we built out systems to minimize downtime and potentially compensate for any excess downtime.
Bitcoin mining allows you to acquire Bitcoin at a lower cost than buying Bitcoin outright and produces consistent results. At Abundant Mines, we take care of setup, maintenance, and performance so that your miners can run efficiently. It's a straightforward way to grow your Bitcoin stack without the guesswork. Book a call to start now. Yeah, the most recent example of that maybe didn't shock me, but was kind of enlightening is when we're looking at these dashboards and always monitoring for whether a customer's machine is down, there's a certain level of granularity that if you go past, like let's say you're in the stock trading world, when you're trading on the 1 day time frame and then you go and try to make decisions on the 1 minute time frame, you kind of lose the forest for the trees, and
Yeah.
it's very tough to effectively make decisions and actually manage that process. The same thing happens with miner uptime, where unless you give a flicker a good hour to show you that it's real, you might think that you have a machine down that's actually just like flapping on the network for a minute
Yep.
and actually isn't causing a problem.
Yep.
And when we're trying to react as a team on a 15-minute interval to something that may not even be an issue, you end up causing friction, noise, frustration, overwhelm, and solve problems that aren't really there. When if you just sat
Yep.
and watched it,
Yep.
let it sit for an hour, might actually just be running fine, and you had a little bit of a data lag on your dashboard.
Exactly. And that's the hard balance between what customer, we're trying to take care of our clients, and it's part of the hard part that we're trying to figure out right now is that sometimes clients have actually quicker data than we do. because depending on their mining pool, they have alerts set up to where literally as soon as they drop below a certain threshold that they set, they get notified and they get a text message saying your miner's down, when in reality it's just going through a reboot process, or it just has a little bit of a variance. And so I think that's something, that we as as the professionals also need to just educate our clients on, is that hey, there is going to be variance here, and once again, don't look at that 15-minute time frame. Zoom out and look at the day time frame, and then let's talk.
Going to that, because sometimes communication can or a miscommunication can create issues. What are some of the challenges that you've come across since not just managing a mining site, but managing a team in this space where everything is new, everybody's figuring out the best process kind of from the ground up? What kind of obstacles have you come up against, and how have you solved them?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I see on a regular basis is just not stripping back questions or issues to their foundations and trying to fix a surface level problem with a surface level solution. And as opposed to really asking the question of saying, why is this an issue? Why are we reoccurringly seeing this? And let's actually look at some of the foundations that this issue is stemming from and seeing if that is actually causing that issue, as opposed to some of this surface level. I think we all get shiny object syndrome sometimes, and we all want to add something to make our lives easier. I personally move in a different direction in my day-to-day life and my work life. Is I look at how can I remove things to make my life easier. I think less is more, and so I tend to take a little bit different viewpoint from some of my coworkers and some of my family, is as opposed to saying how do we add things to make this better. I think something just popped in my head that's a great analogy for this is, I remember years ago when I was getting into backpacking and hiking, is I was like, I need to go backpacking more. And so I went and looked at Backpacking Magazine and did all the research and got all the new tent and the lightest backpack and the best shoes and all that shit, and then never went backpacking. And so I that really was an eye opener, and that lesson of saying, you know what, you need to, the toy is not going to enable you to go do something better. You need to go do something better. And then you can, if you prove to yourself that you are going to be consistent and you're going to be wanting to pursue something more, then you can start adding those tools in. And so I think it's just stripping back foundational items, asking questions. When a teammate brings up an issue or a question that they think is an issue, saying, "Why is this an issue? Is this really an issue?" And depending on their answer, okay, is there other ways that we can solve this in a more creative realm that's going to solve this for a longer, broader time frame, as opposed to just tackling this specific problem right now.
Hmm. I love that answer, and I'm going to ask you a question that directly contradicts it. What are the tools that you can't live without operating a site?
Yep. I mean, key is a computer. We all need computers. So, for us, running a site is, we obviously need a really good internet connection, consistent power, and I need a tool to be able to access the miners on the network. And everything above that is just adds to efficiency and productivity. But the base layer is, I need an internet browser that can log in, access a miner through its IP so I can see what's going on, adjust its pool settings, see the logs to see if there's issues. Everything that we have just helps me to do that faster. And so, whether that's Foreman, which is the main tool that we use to manage our sites and get a broad overview of our machines, it really just acts as a nice window dressing for what we ultimately need, and that's just access to the miners. And I would say it's really hard to live without a tool like that, because of the scale that we have is hard to have hundreds and hundreds of tabs open with individual IPs logged in. And so, but at the foundational aspects, that's really all that's needed. And anything on top of that is just going to make us more efficient, more productive, and ultimately more cost effective for our clients.
You've helped out in building what is obviously super important, which is this physical infrastructure that houses, maintains, and keeps all the miners running. But what's something that you've built or helped work on that most people or almost nobody else sees, but's extremely important to you on a daily basis?
That's a good question. I think I'm gonna hit back on the foundational principles of things, and that is really looking at some of the tools we've used, some of the processes that we use as a company, and peeling those back and kind of asking the hard question of what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? I kind of I kind of think that's part of my superpower in a way, is to really kind of take a broad overview and a 360 view of the world, as opposed to just a small finite scale. And so with that, I think there's certain aspects where I've come in and asked questions or dove into the internals of some of our software and programs, and found some solutions that we've already had in front of our faces that we have not looked at yet. And I'm hoping to continue that process of just opening the eyes and opening the doors of saying, you know what, maybe there's a different way to think about this. Maybe there is a better way to structure our process, or communicate something to our clients, or communicate internally. And so I think that's probably the big one. I've been hounding for process building for months and months and months, and probably been an annoying little bird on everyone's shoulder saying, like, let's systematize this, let's systematize this, let's systematize this. But I think that we're all starting to realize too that as we start to grow and all want to strive for better, that is going to be a really good path moving forward. So I'm happy to see that happen
Yeah,
too.
one thing I've really appreciated about you is that you came in, we already had a site running, we already had, lots of clients under management and plenty of let's call them systems, but they were just ways of doing things. And what I really appreciate about you is you already said earlier, you're not afraid to question what's in front of you and keep asking questions and keep probing. And that level of questioning in something so foundational as how the site runs ripples through the entire organization. And it's not just about how the machines run and the facilities run, it's also about how we interact with each other as people. If we've got good systems, it's way easier for an organization of people to function. They're happier, they enjoy working with each other more. When you've
Mm-hmm.
got a gunked up system and it's inefficient or people are duplicating work, it's much easier for you to lose your patience with the guy who's 6.5 minutes late because you've already had a bad day because you did work that you really shouldn't have had to do.
Yep.
Um,
Clarity is key, and that's, we none of us can see through the fog without a little bit of clarity. And so I think transparency and clarity is and it's something that you're really good at, is running a transparent company. And so I think that it stems from leadership as well, of leading a company that has culture, that the culture is built into it with transparency and improving and clarity like that.
I want to know from you if it's not just building systems and processes for people to plug in. It's also about how you set a culture, as you just mentioned. We bring in a new site ops trainee. How are you teaching them not just to be a good site operator, but also to fit well within the culture? What's your 101 course, your intro to abundant minds to that person?
Yeah, I think really starting with some of the foundations again, making sure that they understand Bitcoin is a key, and some of the foundational aspects of Bitcoin. I think that those of us in a Bitcoin space, whether you're a miner or just a holder or just dabbling in, we understand that Bitcoiners think differently, and we view the world differently, and we act differently. And it's something that is always so amazing to me, that when I get in the room with other Bitcoiners, is there is there's just an immediate sense of understanding, and kind of seeing through the fluff, and kind of seeing through the BS. There's not like this, like, bar room small talk. How was your day? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, we kind of like, we're on the same page here. We know that like the stock market was down 6% today and people are feeling rough, like we know why also. Um, so I think that's the key. It would be the first is just making sure that, all of our staff has just a general basic understanding and belief of Bitcoin. I don't think that we're going to have successful, especially a site operator, operate a site, no matter how technically proficient they are or how much experience they have running a data center, if they are not an actual Bitcoiner themselves. And then also, it is trying to instill and teach some of the questioning and being able to understand the tools that you use is another key one that I think I would really want to teach and ingrain. If we have a set of tools that we have, whether it's a software tools or physical tools, it's so important to know the ins and outs of those tools, to understand how they work and understand your options with those. And I think those two things are probably the core and the key, because if you can understand Bitcoin and if you can understand how to navigate and learn a tool and to ask questions and be able to navigate that confidently and safely, I think that everything else is going to fall into place a lot easier.
Such an important thing that you said, where just because you've got data center experience does not mean that this is going to be an easy ride for you and there's not going to be a lot to learn. I knew, especially as we were first doing, even before our first large scale site, just a smaller site local to me, I had an electrician who'd worked on a data center for Facebook up the road. And he scoped out the work to build out this little facility so I could get some mining up and off the ground, and way overbuilt it, like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely way overscoped it. It was going to be 10 times more expensive and redundant than it needed to be for that use. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is this is a very unique skill set. It's a very unique industry. And even if you've got experience in something tangential, you're still going to have new things that you've got to pick up that are very context specific.
Yeah. I mean, we're in an industry that is setting a new precedent for a better future that we all believe in. And that's Bitcoin in general. And then when you get into Bitcoin mining, that is setting a whole new precedent for energy consumption, resource consumption, how our monetary system is kind of financially and energetically powered. And so we're already at this like weird pioneer forefront where no one understands what's going on and we barely understand what's going on half the time. And so there's a huge learning curve there, and there's a lot of trial and error. And the nice thing is we do have a lot of professionals in the space that we can rely on, and we have a lot of insight that we can tap into. And that's just where it's important to have people with all different walks of life and all different skill sets that can come and bring those things and have a cohesive vision and build this out together, cohesively and sustainably for the future. And so I think that's where it's so powerful to have a variety of walks of life and mentalities and thought processes, people from different cultures, people from different parts of the world that have different takes on things. I am a huge believer that we all perceive the world differently, based on our experiences and our conditions. And so to think that there is one way to think is just so blind. And so when you start to get people in the room that have different walks of life, different perspectives, a whole different perception, it really starts to allow a growth that is not obtainable in such siloed old world industries.
I know you as a very mission oriented and mission motivated person. So I don't think you would work on anything without being able to connect it to a greater purpose for you, for your family, for the world.
Yep.
What is it about being in the Bitcoin mining space that ignites the fire that you're working on a mission? Or what is that impact that you're connecting your daily efforts to?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and the main thing is I get to have conversations like this, and I get to teach classes, and I get to go get my hands dirty and plugging machines in and managing those things, and it's just what I'm passionate in. So for one, like I'm just stoked because I'm living what I have been doing for a long time. I've been able to turn this hobby of, being this hardcore Bitcoiner off on my own island and home mining and, I started a meetup because I just needed someone else to talk to in the Bitcoin space a couple years ago. And that's kind of grown, which has been fun to watch. But just being able to live, to walk the walk in a way. I think Jeff Booth puts this really good. I spoke with him up in Portland last year about this because Jeff is really good about talking about seeing yourself from seeing the world from outside this fiat bubble that we are all in. And if you're going to be trying to view the future from within that bubble, you're just not able to see the reality. And so I asked him, I'm like, I fully understand that, but how do we actually tangibly make that happen in our day to day lives? Like, we are living in the bubble. So how do we start to remove ourselves from that bubble so we can start to see clearly? And he just said, one Bitcoin step at a time. And that is, whether that's moving in self custody, whether that's buying your first Bitcoin, whether that's reading a Bitcoin book, or whether that's working in the Bitcoin space. If you truly believe in something, then why not dedicate your life to it? And he also hits on the home of, like, the more and more time you spend outside of the Bitcoin space, the more energy you're putting towards something you don't really believe in. And I think that's really the key for me, is coming from the mortgage world, coming from the restaurant world with so much waste and so much just like toxic behavior and toxic mentality, and now moving into a world where it's we are really on the forefront and on the ground making a better world. And I truly believe that. And I think that I wouldn't have such an appreciation if I didn't come from other worlds and other careers that I did not feel that way with. Um, I, this has happened a couple times where I've had career changes by choice, because I reached a point where my ethos and what I believe in and who I am did not align with what I was doing. The prime example is I managed Dutch Bros for 7 years in Eugene, and it was a great job when I was in my young 20s and all that. And I have no regrets in that. It taught me so many skills and made some really good connections. But it got to the point where I was handing cups of sugar out to 8-year-old kids that would throw a tantrum if they didn't get enough whipped cream, and grandma would just nod and smile. And it started to eat away at me. And I started to realize, you know what? I can't control what they're consuming, but I can control that I am not wanting to provide that to them. And so I just had to remove myself. And I think that if more people really were honest with themselves on what they really truly believe in, we would move in a better world, and there would be a less consumptive world. We would all be healthier, because if you're really being honest with yourself, you're not going to go drink a Dutch Bros coffee that has 7 scoops of caramel syrup in it. I don't think anyone who is really able to be honest with themselves is going to do that. And there's no hate on that company and no hating on drinking coffee. But as long as you accept the responsibilities and you're really honest with yourself and saying, you know what, I want to do this and I know the reasons why I'm doing this. And so being in the Bitcoin space, there is not an inkling of uh, feeling weird about my morals and feeling like I am not living the truly who I am. So I think that's the biggest thing, is I can live my truth, and I can work my truth now.
Most people today are living more in the space that you just described coming from, where something's not quite right. They're not super fulfilled. I would say probably 99% of people still in the world are living outside of this Bitcoin bubble.
Yep.
What's your advice to that person, or if you like, the version of yourself that hasn't quite gone down this path yet?
Yep. I think um, the key is what I just hit on, and that is finding your truth. And that truth is going to change. and your view of yourself and your view of the world is going to continually change. But if you can accept that change is inevitable and you can accept that change isn't scary, I guess that's not that's I'll state that differently. Change can be scary, but if you accept that change is inevitable, then it becomes less scary because you just expect it to happen. And so I would say, for one, accept that. Let's just be honest. Shit's going to change. It might get worse. It might get better. Just accept it. You can't control it. The second is what you can control, and that is how you perceive that change and how you move forward with that change that's going to happen. And so it is all mental. It's a mental thing. If you can accept and grasp the reality of who you are and understanding that this world is not going to be stagnant and stay the same, then you are so much, you have such a better ability to pivot and organically move and not be caught off guard. So when those types of things come, where after 7 years, I realize I don't feel good about doing this anymore, it's not saying, oh, I'm stuck because I made a career out of this and this is my future and this is all I know. It's saying, you know what? I have changed. This world's changed and I'm going to pivot. I'm going to try and move in a different direction. And I think having that mentality and just understanding and accepting that, I think would solve so much anxiety and fear in a lot of people's worlds, and especially those that feel stuck. Most people feel stuck because they're scared of change. I don't know. What's your view on that?
Powerful. I'd agree with you. It takes courage to push into something that you don't know is what's on the other side. And you just have to be more afraid of things staying the same than you are of the unknown.
Hmm.
Project out what your life looks like today. And if you don't like repeating that day after day for the rest of the days on this earth, you might consider getting more comfortable braving into something that you don't know or don't understand what the implications might be, just so that you can experience something new.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're always you're such a good person on so strongly opinionated on goal setting, and I think it's awesome, and it's something that I've never really pushed myself to do. And so, you pushing all of us staff to list out our goals, we meet every now and then and talk about them and update them, and I think the key with that is just what we had just been talking about: is we list out our goals and then we check in and we change them. And it's a living organic document. It's not this like fixed, chiseled in stone. I'm putting my goals on the blockchain, and everyone's going to hold me accountable for the rest of history. It's understanding that we're always changing and morphing, but having a little bit of that kind of forethought of looking ahead and having somewhere to steer that ship. Whether you know that you're going to hit the right location or not, at least you're heading in the right direction. And I think that's the key. And I think tying into the previous question of how to help people that might feel stuck, it's understanding that. Set some goals out for yourself, make them tangible, and just start moving in that direction. You might not get there and you might not be moving very fast, but you start moving in that right direction. Check in with yourself, be honest with yourself, find your truths, make some changes, pivot, and don't be afraid of, don't it's we've been ingrained in the like flip-flop political mentality. Oh, he said this 10 years ago and now he thinks this. That's awesome. That's great. I think we all need to do that more often, like if someone's stuck in the same thought process they've had for 40 years, that makes me a little skeptical of their ability to think through and be able to look at the reality of the world.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard recently that um, really just kind of affirmed what you just said and challenged the way that I've thought about it before is many of us feel like imposters if we change our opinion on something important. And what I heard more recently was if you aren't changing fundamental opinions on a recurring basis, then you're probably not growing fast enough
Yep.
or growing at all.
Yep.
And that it doesn't make you an imposter. It means that you're evolving.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get a little weird here and tie this back into Bitcoin here. So, the way that blocks are formed in the time chain is they take the previous block's header and then create a whole new block, but they still have a little bit of that nuance that's from that previous block to tie it to that last block. And that's kind of how I visualize our lives move forward. Is we have a stamp of the previous action that we just took, And it's on us to create a whole new transaction and a whole new block moving forward. If you want to think about that in like a day of, the year, where yesterday was previous block, my actions, my choices, and my abilities to move forward today are based on yesterday, but we can form a whole new block right now. And I can create this new block. And you know what? Tomorrow is going to be based on today's block, depending on which path I take. And that's just the beauty of life, is just unknown, uncertainty, and just moving forward and knowing that there is only one direction to move, and that's forward. There's no taking back. It's immutable. Every action you take is stuck in time forever. And you might be able to try to move back in a direction of a mistake that you made, but you're never going to be able to redo that. So just accept it.
Todd, that was amazing. I had another question for you, but I'm not even going to ask it because that's such a beautiful place to end.
All right. We'll leave it there.
Well, knowing that you're a privacy advocate, I usually ask people, where can they find you and connect with you?
Yeah.
So if you'd like to share that, you're welcome to. And if not, you can say no.
Yeah, so I can be found my email with Abundant Minds, so Todd TODD at abundantminds.com. Feel free to reach out. I don't mind you guys connecting with me. It has been a bit of a debate in my brain of how public I want to be. And I think that finding a good balance there. I do have Twitter, but it's an anonymous Twitter that I like to use and creep and crawl. And so if you can figure out who I am on that, then good on you, and you can connect with me and DM me there.
Love it. Well, Todd, I've really enjoyed getting to know you personally. I'm so grateful that you're on the team. I knew from the first meeting that I had with you that if we missed the opportunity to work together, it was going to be a huge loss for us. So I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for all the work you've put in, the patience that you've had as some very foundational things have been implemented in this company, and really just appreciate the energy, the values, the principles that you bring to this, because you are truly a lighthouse in how people should show up. And I think that the longer your influence sticks around, the better everybody else is for it. So thank you for sharing yourself with the company and for sharing yourself with our audience as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for allowing a platform, whether it's a podcast or a work environment, that allows each personality to blossom and for us to be ourselves and make the most of it.
Love it, man. Thank you for coming on. And until next time.
Talk to you guys soon.